A chance encounter on a private jet turns into a shocking confrontation when a wealthy woman's racist comments target a black CEO. What starts as an innocent conversation quickly spirals into tension as the woman's bigotry becomes too much for the CEO to ignore. In an unexpected twist, the CEO's response leaves the woman and everyone else on board speechless. With all eyes on him, he doesn't just defend himself, he reveals something that completely shifts the power dynamic. As the confrontation unfolds, the atmosphere becomes charged, and the woman's own reaction begins to unravel. What happens next? Stay tuned to find out how this shocking encounter ends, and the revelation that nobody saw coming. The CEO, Marcus, had worked hard to get to where he was. As the head of a successful tech company, he'd faced countless obstacles, from discrimination to skepticism. But nothing prepared him for the encounter that would happen thousands of feet in the air. The woman, who appeared to be in her late 40s, had been friendly at first, talking about her vacations, her luxurious lifestyle, and her love for flying private. But when the conversation took a turn towards the topic of race, her tone shifted. Her words, laced with prejudice, were directed at Marcus. It wasn't just the insult, but the assumption, her belief that someone like him didn't belong in the same space as her. Her arrogance was palpable, and it was clear she thought she could get away with it. But Marcus wasn't one to remain silent. What he said next would change everything. The tension in the cabin grew thick as Marcus quietly stared at the woman. Her words had landed, and her smug expression told him she expected no pushback. She didn't believe someone like him could challenge her, not in her world. She'd made her assumptions based on the color of his skin, dismissing the power he held simply because she couldn't see beyond her own narrow perspective. Her voice dropped, as though she was speaking to a child, and she mocked his success, making cruel comparisons between him and others she deemed worthy of her company. As Marcus took a deep breath, he felt the weight of every stereotype that had ever been forced upon him. He knew, though, that this was different. The flight attendant, who had been listening from the back, exchanged uneasy glances with other passengers, but nobody stepped in. Marcus wasn't about to let this moment slip away. He stood up, his voice calm but firm, and said, "You don't know who I am. And honestly, I'm about to make sure you understand." The woman froze, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. For a moment, she seemed to question whether she had misjudged him, but her pride refused to let her admit it. Instead, she tried to deflect, cracking a joke to lighten the mood. But the damage was already done. Marcus wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. "I think it's time you hear something you didn't expect," he continued. The other passengers shifted in their seats, all eyes now on the two of them. His words hung in the air, each one more powerful than the last. The woman, growing more defensive, tried to interrupt, but Marcus raised his hand, signaling for her to listen. What he was about to reveal would not only silence her, but make her rethink everything she thought she knew about power, privilege, and respect. The jet's cabin seemed to shrink as Marcus spoke, each word hitting harder than the last. The woman's face flushed red as she tried to regain control of the situation, her eyes darting between Marcus and the others around her. She had been caught off guard, not expecting him to stand his ground. She tried to laugh it off, attempting to hide the discomfort that was beginning to creep across her face. But Marcus could see through the act. She wasn't amused anymore. The quiet murmur of the other passengers heightened the tension. Whispers spread through the cabin, the anticipation thickening the air. Some were on edge, unsure of what would happen next. Others seemed almost gleeful, knowing something big was about to unfold. Marcus stood tall, his confidence unwavering, yet there was an unmistakable intensity in his eyes. He wasn't just going to fight back with words. He was about to expose a truth so undeniable that it would shake everyone in the room. The woman, realizing she had lost her grip, attempted to shift the conversation back to safer ground. "I don't know why you're making such a big deal of this," she muttered, trying to shrug it off. But Marcus wasn't interested in letting her off easy. Without hesitation, he looked her directly in the eyes. "You think you know me, but you don't even know the half of it. You think my success is just luck? Let me tell you something you won't forget. The cabin grew still, every passenger now hanging on his every word. The moment had arrived. What Marcus was about to say could change everything. The woman's hand trembled, but she didn't move. She was caught in the moment, as if her own arrogance had led her to a point of no return. The tension was unbearable. Marcus drew a slow breath, prepared to say the words that would reveal just how much power had always been in his hands, and how far she had underestimated him. Just as Marcus opened his mouth to deliver the revelation that would shatter the woman's confidence, the unexpected happened. A sudden, sharp beeping filled the cabin, an emergency alert. The plane's cabin lights flickered for a brief moment, sending a ripple of alarm through the passengers. People looked around, tension building in a new way. Was everything all right? The woman's face paled, her earlier bravado fading into fear as she looked out the window, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. The flight attendants moved quickly, speaking in hushed tones, while the captain's calm voice came over the intercom, reassuring everyone that there was no immediate danger, but the alert had caused a temporary system glitch. The interruption, though brief, was enough to momentarily shift the atmosphere. Marcus took a step back, his eyes never leaving the woman. He had a choice now, to use his sudden break to rethink his approach, or to press on and let the moment play out. But just as quickly as the tension had subsided, it returned with a vengeance. One of the passengers, a man seated toward the back, stood up and walked toward the front. His movements were deliberate, and he had the attention of everyone on board. He'd been watching everything unfold closely, and when his eyes met Marcus's, there was an unspoken recognition. "You're Marcus Jacobs, right?" the man asked, his voice steady but carrying a weight of its own. The CEO nodded, but before he could speak, the man continued. "I thought I recognized you. You've been in the news a lot lately, about that lawsuit. It wasn't just about money, was it? It was about changing the system." The woman's eyes widened, her face draining of color. She had clearly not expected to hear that name in such a context. Her defiant stance faltered, her carefully constructed image starting to crack. Marcus could feel the shift. What had started as a personal confrontation was now taking on a much larger dimension. The stakes had just been raised, and the room felt smaller, more dangerous. Everyone was now fully aware of the weight Marcus carried. This wasn't just a chance encounter. There was far more at play. Marcus's eyes locked with the man who had spoken, the weight of recognition settling in. For a brief moment, the entire cabin held its breath. The woman, now visibly rattled, looked between the two men, clearly struggling to connect the dots. The man's words echoed in her mind. The lawsuit, Marcus's public fight for justice against systemic racism in the corporate world, had been headline news. It wasn't just about money or compensation. It was about challenging the very structures that kept people like him from rising to the top. The flight attendants had fallen silent, the tension palpable. Marcus finally spoke, his voice unwavering, a calm force that contrasted with the storm brewing around him. "I didn't just take that fight to court. I've been taking it everywhere, to every person who thinks they can undermine me simply because of the color of my skin. You think this is a privilege-filled world? Think again." The woman, now desperately trying to salvage her pride, stammered, I didn't know." "You didn't want asterisk to know," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "And that's the problem. People like you don't see the work, the years, the relentless fight it takes to get to the top. You just see what you want to see and dismiss everything else. But today you're going to understand something crucial." The cabin was still. Every eye was on Marcus, waiting for him to reveal whatever truth would shift the entire moment into something irreversible. The man who had recognized him stepped forward again, offering a subtle nod of encouragement. "He's not just a CEO. He's the one changing the game. He's rewriting the rules for everyone, whether they want it or not." The woman swallowed, visibly shaken now. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Marcus's gaze softened, but his point had been made. Just when it seemed the situation would dissolve, a final twist broke the tension. The flight attendants returned to the front of the cabin, their expressions turning from nervous to urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of them announced, "we have just received some unexpected news. The aircraft has been diverted. There is an issue at the destination airport, and we need to make an emergency landing." The woman's face went from shock to fear, and suddenly, the balance of power had shifted once more. Marcus's calmness stood in stark contrast to the woman's panic. As the plane began its descent, everyone was left reflecting on the strange turn of events, the confrontation, the truth, and now the uncertainty that lay ahead. And as the jet touched down,